Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit and welcome to this episode. So I wasn't really planning on sharing any other episodes, so this is a totally impromptu release. It is a very special episode. And the reason why I wanted to share this episode was because today is the Virgo Full Moon. And because I shared the Saturn and Pisces episode yesterday, I didn't really talk about the Virgo Full Moon. So a couple days ago, my friend Zaneta Sykes asked me if I wanted to go on Instagram Live with them to talk about the Virgo Full Moon. And Zaneta titled the conversation Deep Listening with Virgo, which is a title that I just love so dearly. And as is always the case when I get together with Zaneta, the conversation ended up being incredible. And I think there were a lot of really interesting tidbits, a lot of really interesting wisdom that was shared in this conversation. So I really wanted to share this with you in case you are feeling like some extra support would be appreciated. Some of you may know Zaneta. Zaneta is a sound ritualist, a tarot reader, a very magical person. Zaneta also lives in Brooklyn and has a podcast called Art Witch, which is incredible. And because we recorded this conversation in Instagram Live, the energy is really, really different than the usual episodes that I usually share. Even as I was listening back to it, I was like, oh wow, this is such a different feel, such a different vibe. It feels very alive for me. Zaneta was literally in their car and I didn't have any of my usual recording equipments, which makes me sound very professional and very polished. So the sound quality is a little bit different. You will hear this, but I think there were some really incredible transmissions here. So I hope that you enjoy this. I hope that this is supportive to you in thinking about the full moon, in feeling into whatever is coming up for you, and hopefully it will serve you. Also, if you live in New York City, please do check out Zaneta's upcoming sound journey, which is happening on March 10th, which is essentially this Friday. So I'm going to read a little bit about this particular sound journey. It's called Where Land Meets Sky. So this is what Zaneta wrote about it. Where Land Meets Sky is a somatic sound journey of the elements, exploring the body's connection to water, fire, thunder, ice, wind, and seismic forces through listening. Participants will be guided through an immersive listening experience, mapping the subtle sounds of the elements in the body. After listening, participants will co-create an original sound piece which will serve as a sonic offering to the forest that will later be played back to every river, stream, ridge, cave, and tree that shared their songs, so that the entire project is a full circle, reciprocal exchange of listening and transmission between community and forest. I mean, seriously, how beautiful is that? I've been to some of Zaneta's sound journeys and literally they are a very unforgettable experience. So if you're listening to this, if you live in New York City, I definitely invite you and welcome you to check out Zaneta's incredible offering. It will be held at Grand Street Healing Project. Again, it is on Friday, March 10th between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. All right, here is my conversation about the Virgo Full Moon with Zaneta Sykes.
For those of you who are joining us, this is Jonathan. Jonathan is a dear friend of mine and an amazing astrologist, artist, just mystic and creative wonder being. You have an amazing podcast. And we're going to talk about Virgo. We're going to talk about Virgo and Virgo as the deep listener and the energies that Virgo brings that are so special and specific. Especially with this full moon that's happening tomorrow, right? So I know a lot of my friends get really wigged out about Virgo. Like as soon as I say Virgo, people are like, I've got a Virgo sun or I've got a Virgo moon or whatever. And then that like the head hangs in shame.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about that? Like, what's this like
I really love that
Virgo?
you started with that, Zaneta, because I remember when I first got the diagnosis of knowing that I'm a Virgo rising and kind of all the emotions that came up around that. So if anybody here listening knows me, you know that I was also, I studied music, and for a lot of my life, I wanted to be a performing artist. And so a part of me, I think, has always really associated with that Leo energy. And I definitely have plenty of Leo energy in my chart too. But when I read about being a Virgo rising, I was like, this is the opposite of everything I wanted. Like, why? You know, and I think it triggered me too, because I see the truth in that. And I really see, a lot of my life made sense in that moment. I think Virgo energy can often be associated with being quite analytical. You know, Virgo energy has this ability to almost take a step back and then see and list all the things that are wrong with a particular situation. And it takes a level of, no pun intended, it takes a lot of refinement for that Virgo energy to really get in a place where it's not, pointing things out with kind of this gotcha energy, but with this energy of like, I'm at your service, right? Like, I'm really here to help you. And I gain a lot of excitement in listening and being with you and being with your particular brand of suffering that you're currently moving through. And yeah, I guess I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to check out how that feels for you and what that brings up for you.
Well, I can see by the chat that there are like quite a few people who are like raising their hands and kind of identifying and resonating with what you're saying. Yeah, I love that take on, rather than that kind of like gotcha energy, but more like I'm here in like healing and in service with you in this like specificity, which I think is like something that I feel like is a strength or a superpower of Virgo's energy, is the subtleness, the nuance, the like really tapping into the specific and the unique, the differences. Like, have you ever played those games where you see one picture and then you see another picture and you have to point out the differences between the two? I feel like that's like a puzzle that Virgo would be very good at. The difference and the nuance. And I find that that's like so wildly undervalued in this modern experience, where things move really fast and where things are kind of like, you can only get to maybe the surface level. And Virgo is like, let's go deeper. Let's like take
exactly.
it there.
I love that, Zaneta, and I think that part of the reason why Virgo energy can be very polarizing too, it's because it's both undervalued and overvalued, right? Like when we think about our school education system, for example, like I'm one of those people. I was one of those people when I was in school that was really able to just kind of rattle off all these random facts, right? And like my brain is like a repository for all kinds of like really random information, and I can hold it all together, and they don't seem to have like these connections with one another. And so I feel like Virgo energy can, that nitpicky energy is also very highly valued in certain parts of our culture. Like, maybe not when you grow up as an artist necessarily, but
I even think about some of my piano teachers that I think may have had really strong Virgo placements in their chart, and they can be really exacting, about how they want things to be, right? And so I think, again, to me, a lot of this is, it's about kind of working with Virgo energy. To me, has to do with looking at the polar sign, right? The opposite sign from Virgo, which is Pisces, and kind of asking, how can Pisces help Virgo? And I think the way that Pisces can really help Virgo is in tuning into the energy behind the action, right? Because I think the energy behind the action is really kind of what is received in the delivery. If the energy behind the action is really that I'm here to be of service, right? And I want to be specific with how I help you. So you tell me what is most needed for you at this moment, and I will see how we can resource you around that. I think the Virgo energy can really help people feel very seen and very resourced and very empowered. But I think when Virgo energy is kind of coming from this space of like the person also having some unmet needs that are hidden or that they haven't quite worked out yet, then I think it can have all kinds of, can be a little swordsy, Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Like swords coming into play with like Virgo's energy. Cause yeah, like when that kind of sense of refinement can be cutting or can be, almost weaponized because of a wounding that we carry or something like that. Yeah. Oof, that's so, so powerful. And it feels really good to me personally to hear about Pisces kind of medicine and special like tandem effort that happens with Virgo in their polarities. For those of you who aren't really familiar, Virgo sits on that kind of other end of the wheel with Pisces. Could you talk a little bit about that a little bit more? Like I think that there's obviously about 1,001, maybe infinite ways that we could like dive into Pisces, Virgo polarity, but I'm curious as to what's calling you right now at this particular full moon.
Thank you for that invitation. What's really coming up for me is how Virgo is a sign ruled by Mercury, right? And Pisces is a sign traditionally ruled by Jupiter. And how Jupiter and Mercury talk about this axis of the micro and the macro. To me, Pisces is about the unified field, right? It's about this quantum field of like everything is everything. Nothing is excluded, right? Pisces can be quite inclusive in that sense, in that I can see that all different perspectives can overlap and coexist, and there's no problem, right? Everything is unified, everything is connected to one another. And I think with Virgo being ruled by Mercury, and not only is Virgo Mercury's home, so to speak, in traditional astrology, we also talk about how Mercury is exalted in Virgo. And in fact, in the exaltation scheme, this is maybe getting a little bit technical, Mercury is the only sign that is, or the only planet that is exalted in the sign that it also rules, right? So there's something very special about kind of Mercury being this independent agent. And so to me, this push and pull between Mercury and Jupiter is about zooming in and kind of zooming out, right? So something that I'm thinking about with this particular full moon, I'm actually looking at the chart of the full moon right now, is the importance of being really discerning around when we're supposed to zoom in and when we're supposed to zoom out, right? Because if you zoom out for the perspective or with kind of this unspoken intention to escape pain, then I think zooming out can kind of become this like blissed out approach to life, right? Which is not really helpful for anyone, because then you're not really seeing how your reality is interacting with whatever is coming up for you, right? But I think at the same time, if zooming in is used as a weapon, as this like reinforcement of our inner critic, then it can also be very, it's not regenerative, you know? So I think having right relationship to like, I can zoom in and I can zoom out, and that both of them are actually skills and muscles that we develop, not like a place where we live, if that makes sense.
Good golly, you just like shared some powerful, powerful wisdom in that moment. How could you say so few words really and then have so much like I love like the option. Like this is something that like I think you as an astrologer in particular have just like given me as a gift over the time that I've known you and worked with you is we have a choice as to like what we can access and how we can work with these energies and like what like what's feeling good for us to work with. Like, you know, yeah, you have the choice of zooming in or zooming out. You have the choice of like, you know, accessing this or maybe staying a little more in your, you know, in your own zone or whatever, in your own lane.
I think there's so much value in both the zooming in and the zooming out, and also in kind of doing both at the same time, right? I think that, you know, this is kind of making me think about my musician days. Actually, this is something that we both share, right, Zaneta? We were trained as musicians. And so it's interesting for me to think about how in my conservatory days, I used to think that practicing is about getting to that final moment, right, of performance. Like I used to think of practicing as, how do I want my performance to sound? And therefore, I'm just going to do everything I can to solidify that and to live in this place of like the ideal performance, right? I'm going to hone my performance of this particular phrase or like this particular part in the music. And I want it to be just right. Again, this is very Virgo rising, right? I want it to be just right so that when I'm up there on stage, I can deliver this perfectly. And I think where I have really moved away from that after having, you know, gone through conservatory training and then taken a few years kind of, you know, taking a step back from music, is that now I see practicing as actually more like maybe how jazz musicians see it, which is that there are many different ways to play a particular passage, right? Or to show up. And that the point of practicing is really to try out all these different ways of being, so that when I'm on stage, I can just kind of pick, right? I can pick, do I want to go this direction or that direction? And then it becomes play. It becomes this really interesting kind of dance that we have with the audience, with the music, with the venue, with our instruments, right? Rather than feeling like, I have to get this right, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, when I think about that, it really feels sustainable, which is the Pisces. I feel like with Pisces, there's always the journey beyond, right? Like there's the, how can this be carried forward on some level? And I think like that kind of being able to try on, being able to access these different ways of expressing or these different ways of creating or whatever it is that you do, you know, we're talking about it from the perspective of performance or maybe sound or music, but it could be for like, you know, your artistic practice. It could be for your business practice. Kind of doesn't really matter. That liveness energy articulates itself in each person in its own way. But it feels to me like, okay, Virgo explores all the options. And like Pisces is like, yeah, what do you want to carry forward? What will help you carry this forward? What will help you live on or continue?
Yeah. What I'm hearing from what you're saying too, Zaneta, is this idea of preparation in order to support rather than to kind of enforce this belief that all of us have, you know, being in a human body, in, you know, a human society, right? That like, I'm never really good enough. Like, can we repackage, repurpose our idea of preparation so that it can support us in walking our path rather than, as this way of like continuing to be, in that space of like, I'm never going to be good enough, this is never going to work out, right? It's also bringing to mind something that one of my teachers, Diana Rose, had mentioned, which is one way to work with Virgo energy is to reveal the perfection that's already inherent rather than trying to get it to a place where it's perfect, and I think, again, right, like the action can look very similar. Like whenever I think about Virgo energy, especially in terms of a minor arcana, I really think about Eight of Pentacles, right? Like this is the person who is there honing their craft, like being very present, being very exacting with how they show up. And how I think, the energy behind that is kind of what matters, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the Eight of Pentacles coming into this conversation about Virgo. I always feel like the Eight of Pentacles for me is like, what needs to get done, what needs to happen, what supports, what structure, what skills, what craftsmanship needs to be in place in order to get through the 9 to the 10. Like this is a turning point often, I find, in someone's journey, like especially when I'm reading for people's art or like their business or something like that. There's this level of like, if you're hitting the Eight of Pentacles, like what needs to kind of quote level up. But I like to think of it as more like what needs to deepen and root down, which I think speaks more to the mutable energy of Virgo in general. For me, like a lot of what you were bringing up reminds me exactly of what this conversation, the heading is about, which is deep listening and Virgo. Like, if you're really present to what's available already, it's so wildly abundant and there's so much for us to access, which I think is a common thread actually between like when like kind of loving on like this idea that there's commonality in the polarity. Like there's overlap in those waves. Sure. And there's overlap in the crest and the trough. But like with Pisces, I feel like there is a presence, like an aware, like a very, very present kind of state that like Pisces invites me into. And I think with Virgo, like if that kind of keen, refining eye or that lens gets focused into the present, it's like a miracle.
Absolutely. I'm actually really curious to hear, Zaneta, about your experience with your Virgo moon and your listening practice too. What comes up for you?
Yeah. Well, so I brought a card in today because I was like, what reminds me of Virgo? And then I was like, oh, it's always this card. And of course it's the Hermit, but it's the Hermit from the Gaian Tarot deck. And it looks like this. I don't know if you can see it. There's like a figure, kind of sitting, checking out an owl. They're like kind of sketching in a book. There's like all sorts of spirit energy over here. There's like their tiny lamp, it's like all that stuff. But I think with that kind of energy, like for me, I take comfort in noticing like the world and all the connections that I have. And I listen primarily to connect to the inherent sacredness that exists all around and within me all the time. So I just feel like it's about kind of taking that time and that space, protecting it, honoring it, honoring quiet, honoring stillness, and giving myself a chance to tune in to what is already there. And every time I do that, I am so nourished. Every time I do that, I feel better. It's medicine. It's literal medicine for me. And I think that speaks a lot to maybe the moon placement for me. Like that this is the way that I soothe myself is by listening.
Totally.
if that
Totally
makes
makes sense. And I also love this thread that you're kind of bringing in, Zanetta, this idea of what stillness even is. Like, to me, when I think about stillness, what is mind-boggling is the fact that it's more about dropping down from this chatter, right, that we can kind of produce in like the mental realm, in like the social media realm, our emails, and like all these people trying to get to us, and dropping in a layer deeper into what is already there. And what is already there is not actually silent, right? It's kind of, it's not, there's a level of attuning to like a more subtle level of sonic dimension, I suppose. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is, that's like one of the big things that I've learned from listening for a long time and focusing on listening in my creative practice and my spiritual practice, is that there's no such thing as silence. It's kind of like there's no such thing as isolation, because silence would indicate isolation, right? And the only way that you can actually achieve total silence is to go into like an anechoic chamber or something like that, a deprivation chamber of sorts, which people can't really exist long term in. Like, that's not a healthy state for people to exist in. To be cut off and to be in, quote, solitary is a form of punishment, right? Used all over the place. And so the idea that like when we're sitting still and we're being quiet, that somehow that is like silencing or isolating is actually very counterintuitive to what I've learned. It's actually where I feel most connected.
Yeah, this is kind of making me think about how even in that moment, right, or even if we are in a chamber that is completely sealed off from the rest of the world, we're probably also still noticing the sounds that our body, is making, right? And that our body itself is a living system, and all these organs, kind of churning, moving, right, making all these different noises. We're also never really alone in a sense, because from the perspective of our organs, kind of in interaction with one another, we're always kind of communicating. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I love that. The internal listening piece. There's a couple things that are coming to mind as we're talking about that, because one of the books that I love to come back to and like read over and over and over again is called Listening to Dreams, and it's by Ione. She was the partner of Pauline Oliveros, the really famous composer and deep listening, kind of deep listening inventor. I don't know. I have funny words about that and feelings about that. But Pauline Oliveros kind of cultivated a very specific practice and set of practices around listening, and she called it deep listening. And the book that I've been reading that's kind of like from that kind of canon of work is called Listening to Dreams, and you can find it all over the place. But it talks a lot about how we hear in dreams. So this feels like a really like the intersection of like Virgo and Pisces. Like how, like, think to your dreams. Think about like when you've heard sounds in your dreams. How did you know that they were sounds? How did you like experience that information? What told you that? Did you really hear it? Could you sing it back? Did it feel some way in your body? Like these experiences, these very subtle experiences, that are a layer of information that Virgo can tap into that's happening in a Piscean world is really interesting to me.
Yeah, that's really rich. I'd have to kind of sit and feel into that. I think, what that's bringing up for me is also this idea that, both Pisces and Virgo, I think really speaks to the way that we are very interconnected, right? If we're thinking about Pisces as kind of that quantum field, with Virgo, I think it's also the interconnectedness of matter, right? Like the way that my chair, for example, is in some ways connected through gravity with the floors that I'm currently standing on, and that this floor is connected to the structure of the building that's connected to the earth, right? That ultimately is connected to all these other beings. And it's also making me think about how sound travels through matter, right? And that's how, in fact, we experience sound, right? And so I think in this exploration of like Virgo and Pisces, there's also something around how the health of one organism is always in some ways really connected to the health of the other organisms that are around it, right? Yeah. Including the dream world. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that so much. And I do find that like listening practice has shown me that over and over and over and over again. Like, you know, I think I recently just posted about it, but like the idea of making art for the land before making art for, say, people. And how that, like, the process of listening has taught me that it starts with what you give, not what you take. And so there's like this really interesting kind of experience that I've had, especially in recent, like say the last year, where I did a lot of like only doing rituals and only making art for land, for rivers, for, you know, those quiet spaces in the forest. And then feeling into how that affected me, how that, like, what was that connection that opened up and how did that resonate with me? Just doing that and not kind of ever recording a single sound in that place. And I think you're right. Like the health of another being and singing a song to another being is for sure going to make you feel better.
Yeah. We're meant to be sharing, right? We're meant to be kind of allowing whatever is moving through us to be projected outwards. I'm actually curious, Zaneta, how has that changed your practice, or even maybe how you see yourself as a musician and as a magical person, as a witch?
Yeah. I think it's like suddenly art is making more sense to me than it ever made when I was in school, than it ever made when I was like on television or on a stage or anything like that. Like I never resonated with the idea that I'm going to go and channel this thing for people and it's going to be like one time consumed, like a single use plastic experience. And then that's it. And then like suddenly, you know, every resource that went into creating that thing, every kind of like effort or energy, it's like you don't feel the thread necessarily. And sometimes I do think you can. Don't get me wrong. Like I don't want to go and put anyone else's process into a particular lens here or framing. But for myself, I felt that when I went and played a concert, it wasn't the right exchange of experience. It wasn't the right exchange of energy for me for whatever reason in this life. Maybe that's my Virgo moon.
I resonate with that.
Know.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel right to me. And so I had to kind of like, it feels like really go against the grain, do a little bit of the hermit action and ask myself really seriously and honestly, like over and over and over again, what does feel right? What does feel like true to who I am and what I'm experiencing and sharing in this life? And what kind of started to come out of like experimenting over and over and over again was that when there's that initial idea of something that inspires you, or you have a creative vision or something like that, when that happens, there's also a relationship that's being formed. And And for me, especially, I record a lot of sounds in quote the natural world. So I'm recording a lot of like wilderness spaces, right? And nature spirits and non-human kin. And that relationship is more important than any product or any creation that I ever fucking put out ever. It's like, will always be powerful. It's more powerful than I could even understand, and I won't ever understand in this lifetime. And I'm okay with not understanding that. And then starting to say, well, when I make this art, I'm inviting a bunch of people to be a part of a relationship process and a relationship tending. And then who is this art for? Like, what does the art mean then? And that's what I think has been really shifting inside me and around me and through my art.
Wow. Honestly, Zaneta, hearing that was such a gift for me because it's making me also reflect on my relationship with my music and my art, and how for me, a lot of it is about my relationship with time, actually, like time itself, like capital T time. And how, for example, when I listen to a song that I wrote in 2017 or in 2016, it takes me back to that version of myself, and it takes me back to that moment of time, which actually never really, that time never really passes, right? Like, yes, it passed for me in this human body, and yet in the grander scheme of time, that still exists. And so it is about reconnecting with these different threads of time and also space. You know, it always takes me back whenever I hear maybe a song that I wrote a few years ago, takes me back to exactly the moments where I was recording that, where I was writing that, where I changed particular parts of the lyrics. And yeah, wow. That was a profound realization for me that is happening in real time as I'm hearing you speak. So thank you.
I love like what you're opening up on that really personal level about like when you've created something and then it takes you back to the moment, the exact moment. It's like the purpose of art, I think, is so much more layered and so much more multidimensional than the idea of the transaction of having
Absolutely.
a concert or a performance. I mean, we talk all the time in healing spaces about performative energy and trying, especially as queer folks, to try to really like release a lot of performative demand and energy on us and our bodies. And yet, like, where is that in our art practice? Like, where did performance arise from? Like, those things are like, I feel like worthy self-explorations, worthy community explorations, you know, like, I think, who was it just the other day when I was talking with our mutual guest and mutual, witch love, who was it? Amanda Yates Garcia, Oracle of LA. I think she had talked, like, in the conversation that we had, she was saying something about like, what was it? Like, you know, our, I just lost my train of thought. Darn it.
You're really connected with time
I
right
love
there.
it.
This moment.
It was like the time was the warp was so deep that like I couldn't even suck myself out of it. But I think kind of getting back to like the idea of like you're stepping into a moment or who the art is for, I think it's just shifting in general for me in a lot of ways. And it's also like we're like evolving out of this kind of very transactional performative space around our art. And it's okay to like permit. Like that was one of the biggest things I think Virgo has imparted upon me is like when you have a knowing that you need to go on a different path, when you have a knowing that you need to like follow that deer trail into that mystical, you know, hidden waterfall or something, it's really, really powerful to honor that and to follow.
Yes. This is making me think, Zaneta, of something that I've been really exploring with regards to Virgo, which is the idea that Virgo is a mutable earth sign, right? And this is interesting because we kind of think of earth as the most kind of solid element, and then mutability as about, endings, conclusions, synthesizing, shifting, right? And so what is that earth that shifts, right? It's kind of making me think of mud, and how mud is, or clay can be shaped into something, right? It's also making me think about earthquakes and about the way that the tectonic plates under us move in very, very subtle ways. And when I think about Virgo energy nowadays, one of my favorite metaphors is an ecologist, right? Like kind of watching the very slow movement of Earth and how everything is always changing. It's kind of making me think about the Octavia Butler quote of God is change, change is God, right? And whatever you touch changes you, and whatever, changes you, touches you. And it's kind of this idea that like change is that which is, a reminder of our aliveness, right? And how we are always kind of moving through life being changed, and that change, our changeability, even in the most kind of the molecular sense or kind of the physical sense, is a signal of our aliveness. It's an evidence of our aliveness. And how can we honor that and work with that and continue to to kind of have a lot of compassion with ourselves with regards to all the emotions and all the challenges that can come with change, right? As well as the joy and the celebration. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That nurturing tenderness and care that like, I think like, if you see, like a fragile budding shoot in like, as you're walking on a path, you wouldn't go and trample that. Like that sensitivity to notice something so tender inspires even more care, even more like preciousness. And I feel that energy also with Virgo, like as a moon quality to me, as like, feeling it into the moon sign. Like to notice the subtle is also to be caring in a really tender way, and in a way that like, is nuanced. It feels really good to talk about this with you. Like it feels really healing to talk about it and to kind of like just somewhat synthesize some of the ideas around Virgo, but also to open them, and to release like some of the energies that I think are ready to be released, as like so many people in my community have, I think, been doing this work on many levels, many ways of like saying, I have to let go, or like that letting go is the way forward, or like perfectionist energies that like I used to think about this sign with, I'm releasing those as well and being kind to the sign even. Yeah. I don't know if it sounds like what's that band? I can't remember that band, but it sounds like a Ace of Base song, Kind to the Sign.
Yes. I love that.
What do you feel like Virgo would ask of us?
The first thing that came to me as you were asking that question was to pay attention. And you know how paying attention to me is also a form of love, right? In energy work, people always say energy follows thought, right? And so I think there's something about Virgo energy that is about loving through paying attention, being really attuned to the micro subtle changes, right? And how that is a really valid form of loving. And you know how I think that it's interesting because this is making me think about how Virgo is a sign that is between Leo and Libra, right? So like in the wheel zodiac wheel, yeah, in the wheel of the year, Virgo is placed between Leo and Libra. And it's making me think about how, in some sense, you can kind of think of it as Virgo being supported, right, by this leonine desire to really help everyone in some ways, including ourselves, right, and including the communities that we are in, including the non-human world, to find this inner radiance of one's aliveness. And then also with Libra, right, as being Virgo is really supported or contextualized by this exchange that we have with one another, right? So to me, it's really interesting thinking about Virgo as like standing between or sitting between the two signs, that one is ruled by the sun, right? Leo is ruled by the sun. It has to do with like this unique way that our life force moves through us. And then Libra as being about the relationality, right? So there's something I think around uniqueness or individuality and also about relationality that I think Virgo is kind of in the middle, maybe playing referee or kind of bridging the two energies. Yeah.
I could totally see that. Because, you know, like, you hear a lot of conversations around, you know, honoring one's own boundaries or like honoring your knowing, things like that. And oftentimes when we do that, it leads us back into closer intimacy and connection with others and in relationships that are much, much more alive and feel good to be in. You know, there's like a lot of health that we like go through that journey of like, you know, deep diving in self and then being like, okay, I'm back out in this kind of like Libra balance, the sense of like rebalancing relationships and connections. So I could totally see that almost like shelving of things.
Exactly. What about for you, Zaneta? What is Virgo kind of speaking to you in this moment, you know, as we are approaching the Virgo full moon?
Well, I looked up at the moon the other night as I was walking in the park. I was taking a break from composing and I was walking in the park and I felt like the sky was this particular band of colors that was so dreamy and resonant and called me in and sucked me in. So I went in that direction and then I looked up and I saw a group of people and I was like, oh, what are they doing there? And I looked in the direction that they were looking and there was a bald eagle there.
Whoa.
And not very far from the ground. And I stood quietly with a group of people just watching the bald eagle. And after a time, I felt it was time to leave. And I was kind of feeling into my body and I was feeling into the energy of what that experience gave me. And then when I walked a little further, I found a little clearing that also felt beautiful and alluring and calling me. And I went there and I sang to that area. And so I guess for me, I was looking at the bald eagle. I was looking at the moon almost full. It was actually a moon in Leo. And I was just noticing beauty and I was noticing things that maybe I would in my haste not like typically be aware of or pay attention to. And that called something forth in me that I felt like wanted to be articulated, wanted to be realized. And so I think these energies don't just exist to be noticed. They exist to be acted upon and honored. So that's something that I feel like is a message maybe from this full moon is like something something is gifted to us in the noticing, and maybe that transpires into a doing.
I really love that. I think it's really making me think about like how we in modernity have forgotten about the aliveness of all things and of the world around us, and that maybe, you know, in many ways, as much as we yearn to connect with the non-human world, the non-human world also yearns to connect with us, you know, and that those energies are present and we are noticing those energies because it yearns, it craves a relationship with us. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you for that. That is such, that's
There it is.
There it is. Whoop, there it is. That's totally the feeling. Like, if it's not a one-way glass that we're looking through here. Like, it's not one-sided. Like, that's something, there's a sentience that I think is, if you're noticing, you start to really see it. You're like, what? Like, what is this relationship that's being formed here? What are these connections that are happening? What are these messages? What are these dreams? What are these sounds? What are these feelings? What is it? And it does speak through us and invites us into something.
Totally.
So, yeah, that's just a little bit of something that I feel like the full moon in particular is like feeling really good about. I see someone ask a question, a really quick question here. Helen asks, are there any tips or rituals for this coming moon in particular? What do you think?
This is really interesting because a couple things are coming up for me, and one is like maybe more tangible and the other one is not as tangible, and I think maybe require a deeper investigation on the person's part. So I'm going to give two answers here. For some reason, the first thing I was thinking about when I saw that question was the idea of like having a bath, especially if you live in the northern hemisphere. I think that's really powerful, like really giving yourself permission to have a bath ritual, like not just, you know, taking a bath, right? But like really creating a ritual space. I have recently been doing a lot of like what I call ritual designing, where I spend a little bit of time like thinking through what are the materials that I would want, you know, how do I want to set the space? What is my intention? And then really going into the ritual space with all of that. That's felt to me a lot more exciting than kind of taking somebody else's ritual that they've already written. Again, no shade to people writing rituals because I think that's really, really helpful, right? And also I'm feeling like this full moon may be kind of calling upon this deeper part of us that also wants to be creative about how we set that space. So that I think would be my first suggestion. My other suggestion is I'm looking at the chart here, and it's really interesting that Mars in Gemini is actually squaring that full moon, right? And Mars is, you know, has been in Gemini for now like almost 7 months or some crazy thing like that. So it might be interesting to do some ritual around this, right? And thinking about Mars in Gemini makes me think about writing letters. And I'm almost wondering if there's something around this act of writing a letter to whoever is kind of coming up for you, thinking about maybe what has been brought up throughout this period of Mars in Gemini, you know, which I think, it's not coming off the top of my head right now, but I think it started in the fall sometime. I don't know the exact date. You can probably Google this, but it's making me think about like really writing letters to someone or some part of us, or, you know, it can be a future part of us or a past part of us. It can be to the non-human world, and releasing it in ritual, like releasing it with fire, right? Mars associated with fire, Gemini associated with words. I think that could be a really interesting ritual suggestion that I just kind of, you know, thought about off the top of my head. What about you, Zaneta?
I mean, I think that is some really, really awesome, like, channeled advice to just, like, consider writing and using the power of writing and, like, that Marsian energy to kind of maybe not necessarily go and, like, I don't know, like, hand them the letter. but the idea that, like, you could, you know, kind of get what you need to say out and handle that relationship in the way that you need to, or whatever situation you need to, and say, okay, like, let's clear this energy. Yeah, definitely. I love that. I love that idea. I also think it's kind of like, you know, if I'm thinking of it from a musical standpoint or a sonic standpoint, like, a lot of times I think of full moons as kind of like the quote climax, or like the really heightened, you know, some people might call it a chorus or something, but like the heightened portion of the cycle or the song cycle where you're like experiencing the fullness of it. So, like, what is that fullness and how can it be expressed?
I really love that. Yeah. Yeah. And it's making me think about maybe doing like what I've been calling the Spotimancy, you know, if you have Spotify. And if you have if you have a playlist, you know, just put it on shuffle, right? And then choose like a song, and then, or let Spotify algorithm choose a song for you, and then look at the lyrics and, you know, take out like maybe a particular, you know, word from the lyric that really sticks out to you, and then maybe make a sigil, you know, or something like that. I think can be really interesting.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love the, like, the musical kind of, I guess, musical bibliomancy. Like, these words are getting.
We need to find the words for it. We need to make it up, Zaneta.
We need to make it up. That's true. That's true. I'm a big word maker upper. But I feel like for myself, you know, obviously, like, I've been sharing a lot about like my upcoming project, and I've been sharing a lot about, like, you know, the process and going through those layers of things. And like, I didn't know that this project was going to premiere at this time. I had no idea. Like, I just so happened to be healthy enough to work on the project at the time I did. And then I had a deadline that was like, you have to get this project done by like March 15th. So, like, I didn't know that I would be celebrating this moment, this like full moon week, like basically doing probably the most Piscean thing I can think of, like, which is just to listen with a bunch of people to all the elemental sounds and like wash in that and like make art together.
I love it so much. I can't wait. I will be there in attendance.
I'm so excited, especially to do this with you. Like, it's like coming back to our conversation earlier about like, who do you make art for and why? Like, I love the idea that I get to be with my friends and, you know, people who are going to become my friends or whatever, you know, and we get to world dream and world build together and to enjoy each other's company. Like, there's just something so sacred and special. And I really do think that, like, at the end of the day, art is about like us being together and having, you know, having this like shared experience. Yeah. So it really feels great to like, and you've been like someone who has gotten to see a lot of evolutions of what I make.
It's been such a joy, honestly.
I appreciate that. I really appreciate it. And it's really cool to be able to share it specifically.
I think it's also, I want to say, Zaneta, that it's been really inspiring for me to watch you in this process, because you're one of those, you know, artists and practitioners that I think really is very finely attuned to like what the being is and like how the being wants to be shared. And I think that is so important in terms of, you know, really keeping the integrity of the frequency that wants to be materialized or translated through us, right? That I think one of the most one of the most sacred duties, again, sacred maybe being a Virgo word, right? One of the most sacred duties, I think, for practitioners, for people who really work with magical frequencies, is to listen to the specificity with which the frequency wants to be birthed or wants to be translated. And I think that you're someone who's so deeply attuned to that. And it takes a lot of work, you know, to be so in such deep attunement. So I really admire that from you, and I really learn a lot from you from that process. So thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, friend. I appreciate that reflection on my own journey, and I can feel at times when it feels like a real struggle to stay in that space of integrity. Like I can feel like if this is the space, I can feel myself being like, you know, like really, really struggling with like, I can hear what's being called of me, and I can hear like where that might want to take me. And then like, but my, you know, my ego or whatever you want to call it, or my mind, a lot of times it's just my mind. It's like, is that the smartest move? You know? And, but I like this year in particular, you know, having like long COVID and like changing everything about how I work has taken me to a space where I have to kind of like, I only have so much energy to give to things. And oftentimes that's so much less than I ever thought I would be, the way that I would ever thought that I would have been making art. But time and time again, I'm being proven that that's actually the most effective way. It's the most powerful way, is the way that like, that, you know, maybe I didn't give 110% this time. Maybe I gave 60%, and that's somehow that becomes more resonant to someone than when I was just giving everything all the time. And so I guess that's like speaking to the integrity idea that like your body has integrity. Your body has integrity about your process. And so like the more that I'm just like, okay, yeah, this is what my body needs. This is like what I need to do. This is how I need to care for myself. I feel like I'm making more the art that like wants to come through me, and like
I really love that. That's bringing up two things for me, Zaneta. One is that, you know, this process of kind of getting out of the center, right, that you were talking about a moment ago. To me, that's so important, because I think that in order to understand where that frame even is, right, one really needs to swing the pendulum both ways, right? So I think that that is part of the process. And I also think that with regards to listening to the frequency that wants to move through us and like really making the art that we want to make, I think that it's time for us to stop pretending like our artistic gifts and our mystical gifts are not medicine, right? Because if they are medicine, you know, something that I keep talking about, and, you know, some of the people who are in my learning containers are probably sick of me talking about this, but, you know, the Greek for medicine is pharmakon, right? And so the Greeks understood that medicine is both poison and cure, right? Or like elixir. And so, you know, the difference between something being a poison and a medicine really lies in the fact that medicine is essentially poison administered at the right time with the proper dosage in the right context, right? And so I think if our mystical gifts, our magical gifts are pharmacon or medicine, they're not going to work for everyone. And I think part of our responsibility is in also protecting that this is not for everyone, you know?
Ooh.
Yeah. And I think the more we trust the ways that it wants to move, and the more we take up that sacred duty of listening to how it wants to move through us, the more we can refine it so that only the right people will be attracted to it. Only the right people will be drawn and resonating with it, because we're not adding all this other weird frequencies, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It reminds me of the editing process that I've been going through with all these nature recordings. Like, what helps often things kind of sing, or what helps you hear things, is when you're able to kind of distill, like, what are those actual frequencies that you're trying to highlight. Literally, like, I'm in an editing software, I'm looking at the spectrograph, I'm looking at the frequencies of sound, X 1,000 hertz, 20,000 hertz, whatever. I'm looking at these frequencies and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what wants to kind of shine, what wants to really come through. But that's like, it takes that discernment, and it really does. This is like where I think Virgo energy like saves the day, right? Like, this is where Virgo comes in and is like, I'm going to get you that medicine at that right time, at that right place, in that right context. Like, I'm going to help you out by like really, really cutting the fluff, cutting the fluff.
Exactly.
Jonathan, you are a dream person to talk to audiate with, to imagine our creative community and its journey forward.
I'm so grateful for you. This conversation has been, I think it's already the highlight of my week, even though the week is just starting. So thank you so much. Always such a joy to co-create and to be in conversation with you.
I can't wait to share our Art Witch conversation that is going to come out
excited.
soon. Basically next week.
So exciting.
It's basically next week. After the grant project is done, then I get to go and like have fun and like
amazing.
Start doing
that was such a fun conversation.
But oh my God, you shared so much in that conversation. It's like, it is so nutrient dense. Like, you could live off of that. Anyway, I'm going to, if anyone has any other questions or wants to connect with with me or Jonathan, I'm obviously at Sound Art Magic. You know who I am, Zaneta. And this is Jonathan at Nate_Chi, QI. So you can just look them up. But please check out Jonathan's work. Jonathan is an amazing practitioner of astrology, creative, creative everything. It's like I don't have enough good language to really describe everything that you do. You're such a multifaceted.
Thank you. I've stopped trying.
But you do so much. So much. Exactly. Please follow Jonathan. And also your podcast is phenomenal. It is so talk about Virgonian bliss, Virgonian healing. That is like a powerful podcast that has not only so much wisdom and information shared, but it's just gorgeous to listen to. Like, it is a sonic experience.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
So that's
correct.
Healing the Spirit, right? Healing the Spirit podcast. And you had some amazing conversations, over the whole span, but The most recent ones are some really doozy.
Yeah, and there's even one between the two of us. So I definitely recommend, if you're listening to this on Instagram, definitely check out my conversation with Zaneta. I shared that at the end of the year, last year, 2022, because it felt to me like such a primer on what it means to be listening to the energy of the collective and to whatever is stirring up within you. And I just am so grateful for your work, Zaneta, and the ways that you invite us to deeper listening. Yeah, it feels so timely, and I think your work is so subtle and nutritive and really, really, really powerful. So thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. For those of you who want to come along and join us for the in-person event, basically the in-person event in Brooklyn, that's happening this Friday, March 10th at the Grand Street Healing Project in Williamsburg. It's called Where Land Meets Sky. It's a somatic sound journey through all the elements: thunder, fire, wind, ice, snow, rivers. And we're going to be listening to those energies and recordings. We're going to be receiving them. And we're also going to be creating a sonic offering, an original sound art piece for all those rivers, streams, waterfalls, ridges, caves that will be played back later in a full kind of ritual of reciprocity with the land. So I hope you all joining us. That link is in the bio. You can check that out. But for now, thank you so, so much, Jonathan, for this conversation on Virgo, on listening.
Thank you, Zaneta.
You are a gift.
I love you so much too. And this conversation has just been so nourishing to me. So thank you so much.
Thank you, friend. Have a good day and
bye.
catch the replay, everyone. Bye.